another episode of The Boy. Coming here from the shop studios in Duval County, Florida. Get this switched up here. And we'll see what's going on in the movie magic of the shop studios. All right, so again, welcome to The Boy. This one's titled, as you can see, 9/11 and the Forever Time. What does that mean? 9/11, we have another anniversary and a lot of reactions. I mean, I'm doing this afterwards. I sort of wanted to see what kind of stuff was going on, and it's the usual stuff. But you know, it really makes me reflect a little bit on our society. So I figured I wanted to talk a little bit about 9/11 a little bit, and the Forever Time reference is sort of just my way of, I don't know, sort of, how do you, like, I really feel like, and I don't know how to describe this. I think other people have tried to have already described this in books and other social, analysis, that after the 2000s, with the usability of the internet, with stuff like this, the fact that I can do this YouTube channel, I don't need to be picked up by some major, I don't have to be picked up by some major entity. I can simply be, broadcasting some stuff. It's sort of like, I don't have to get an FCC license and all this stuff like I would if I was doing radio. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that's going on now that enables us to sort of affect pockets of people that aren't so centralized. So there was a time when, if you think about way back in the day, if you were on the radio, you were known, because what other way of really getting to know somebody other than word of mouth? Or, there was no really recording systems back way a long time ago, like in the 20s or something like that. You're not going to just go pick up a cassette or CD or something like that. And even then, in the era of the CD and cassette and all that stuff, you still had a relatively closed off means of distribution, and they were starting to get people were starting to produce stuff and make their own things, sort of piecing together. A lot of hip hop was made by sort of parsing together elements of other bits of music. But anyway, that's not the point. My point is, in those times, we really had a lot of funnels that sort of brought culture and specific fashions and people into a forefront in front of everybody. And I feel like those people had major influence on society. And now because the internet allows us to have access to pockets that are so specified to our own interests, and really we could just go down a rabbit hole of our own sort of bias and what reality we sort of want to believe, we can find it on the internet, I'm sure. And so what that's done is sort of fractured what these sort of mementos that we have from like other eras, like you can sort of denote the style and way things were in the 80s or in the 70s. Everyone was wearing bell bottoms and this and that. And there were some cultural icons that sort of shifted the way things were. So you can call back and reflect on those things. And I think once the internet really got usable, when you could actually watch a video on your phone, that's really, I think, where we start to see this fracture in the Forever Time. Now we don't have these pockets to cling to. We have like we have phenomenons that segments of the population are familiar with and stuff like that. But I think it's getting smaller and smaller, especially now that I think fewer and fewer people, for instance, are subscribing to cable. A lot of people are getting their TV content and stuff like that from the internet now. And so that really opens the horizons and the distribution channels. And with that in mind, I think that also leads to this conundrum we have to where we all have sort of a fleeting I mean, in a way, we've all been alienated from reality because, who has access to see if something like I was looking at something, I don't remember what it was. And Erin, my girlfriend, she was like asking, she said something about the amount of vitamin C that was in something or the other. Like, do you really think it has this much or whatever? And I'm like thinking to myself, I mean, how could I even test that? I mean, I don't have access to the means of testing that. I guess I could take a sample of it and have it sent to a laboratory if I wanted to pay for that kind of testing. And even then, I would have to know how to figure out if the data is substantial to what it is that, like, let's say, for instance, it does have, I don't know, what was I saying, vitamin C or something? Or let's just say vitamin C. Let's say it's supposed to have X amount of vitamin C. And so I have it tested and some certain amount per weight is that vitamin C. But does that mean it's in the right form for me to digest? How do I even know what that form is? And I would have to, how do I really know anymore? Because it's like, it depends on whose article you're reading and who funded them anymore. I mean, capitalism has reached its claws into things that we thought could be pure, like science, right? So you could say it doesn't have to be just capitalism. The government could do things like that as well. So, it's not just, again, one of the sayings I say on this show all the time is the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. So we have to be vigilant over government power and corporate power. Both of those wield power. We've chosen to live in a capitalist society with a monetary policy. And so to that end, we should be able to recognize the faults of that system, especially now that we've been running it for a while. We've seen some crashes and we've seen people suffer at the behest of the market. And it's a lot of people will jump on, and if they're listening or watching this in the archives, are going to say, well, if it was communism, all these people would die and all this stuff. And I'm not saying we should go and be communists, right? It always goes to this like reductio ad absurdum or something like that. Just because I critique capitalism and I'm saying, hey, we should watch out for like, it's like saying, yeah, you can use morphine if you want to, if it really hurts, but if you do that, you might get hooked, right? So we should know those terms, right, ahead of time, right? Yeah, you can go gamble. It's legal if you're of age of majority, right? But, or actually not even age of majority, you have to be 21, right? So let's say you meet that statutory limit, your age is 21. You can gamble, but hey, once you find that if you have a propensity to be addicted to gambling, now you have to recognize that and watch out for that, right? So it's the same kind of thing. Capitalism has a propensity to go one way or another because its motive is profit. And we can deduce, we can know in our mind, if we're trying to maximize profit, what will you do? You'll try to pay your labor the least that you can, right? You're going to try to skirt the regulations and any costs the best that you can. So if that means the choice between polluting the river versus maybe sealing up the waste, whatever waste we're talking about, and moving it to some waste facility, that's definitely going to cost a lot more. Maybe it makes your plant less feasible, but if the price is the externality of poisoning of river, then it just shouldn't be even a choice. But it is a choice, and it's a choice that we've been making over and over. I say we because we allow it to happen. How active are we in preventing it from happening? I think a lot of us feel pretty powerless. You know, someone jump in. There's a couple people that have weaved in and out, bombed and weaved in and out of the video. Put down a comment, say something, even if you're watching this on the archive. Um, put something down. I mean, I'm just a crazy guy that's got this podcast show thing, and you know, one of a billion people doing this kind of thing. But I feel like there's a reason for it, because I think there's got to be an alternative to all of this left right banter, this talk about, you know, left wing, right wing politics and who's this and that. You know, I ran into old buddy of mine today. I was pumping gas and he yelled out, "Boy, what?" I'm like, oh, geez. Anytime I hear that, I never know. I've met so many people in my life. And I'm not bragging or nothing. I'm just saying, just because of the nature of the events that have occurred in my life, I've run into and affected many people's lives, good or bad or indifferent. I've been, you know, so a lot of people to some degree in this localized area know who I am. So I never know who I'm running into. So I meet this old friend of mine and we get to talking, and he mentioned something about, because he's a military guy, Army, I believe. And he mentions him going to Africa. And I thought that was really interesting. And I said, you know, Africa is a really interesting point that you brought up, because I have this show. I talk about stuff like the fact that we're in Africa and like, what are we doing there? And he's like, well, China's practically colonializing them. And yeah, and I was aware of that. And basically what that means is there is a race to claim resource in Africa. So it's modern day colonialism, using dollars, using debt, using these terms by the IMF, by China, by Russia, to lend them money to do whatever. Who knows if I don't even know if they're altruistic. Who do you think they are? The people that are running the things in Africa and the countries, the different entities that they'll be putting together. Do you think they're going to work in an altruistic mode, or do you think it's going to work in an extraction mode? Because I think that it's one or the other. But I doubt they're going to say, wow, you know, we really should try to do our best to create a living wage for these African people now that we've indebted the country. And we've seen this happen in the past, especially if we overthrow a democratically elected leader, and there's no, you know, we overthrow democratically elected leaders to put someone in that will do our bidding, right? And then they extract from the people, their labor, kick them off their land. Yeah, they'll say, well, they were making less than $2 a day. Well, maybe, but if they were subsistence farmers and they were living on their land just fine, not making any money and just doing their thing, you know, and maybe making a measly amount of money, enough to do whatever they needed to do, to kick them off their land and say they have to live in the city now because the land belongs to the state, who then basically sells it off to a corporation or indebts it over to a corporation, to extract the land, to use the labor, to abuse the people of the country. I mean, it happens all over the country. The IMF does it everywhere. The United States, practically, well, we didn't invent it, but, you know, we continued the tradition of creating the banana republics in order to seize countries and make it more favorable for our banana farmers to basically pillage and rape the land and do all that kind of shit. You know, it's like we always have to talk about this, right? This idea that there are realities to America's story. You know, it's like that mob boss metaphor I give. You know, it's like the kid of the mob boss grows up, right? And so now, like, should the kid reflect on it, or should the kid and say, hey, I don't want to continue this tradition, or should the kid be loyal to the father and say, no matter what the father's done, be killing the bodega owners, roughing up people to get protection money. Let's say they did all of these things. should the child grow up and say, I have a, should I say that I have a, what am I saying? Like a loyalty, or like, I don't care what my father's done, blah, blah, blah. I'm just going to be loyal and I'm the best. And I like the position I'm in as being the intimidator of the neighborhood. I'm the son of the intimidator. I'm going to carry it on. We're going to be just fine keeping people at bay. If you feel like that's a good way to be, and that's the way our country should be, then then you get people like Trump in office. I mean, really, at the end of the day, that's what it is. If you feel like we should be the shining light of benevolence and justice and, the world, like working with nature, that we don't just, piss on nature and the world and just shit where we eat all the time. But I don't, tell me what you think. Put a comment in, or you can, I believe you can jump in on Facebook Messenger if you want a video in and be on the show. Go ahead and try that out. I haven't tried it. You can be the first person. But you have to do it while we're live. So if you're watching this on archives or listening on the archives, it doesn't work that way. So if you want to catch the live shows, generally they're going to be Wednesdays at Wednesdays 10 p.m. Eastern time, Sundays 10 p.m. Eastern time. Sometimes they're a little bit late. I don't know. I don't really expect people to tune in whenever my show comes on. My show comes on and you get a notification, I think, on Facebook. If you're not, there's ways to get notified. And then you just tune in on your own time. You know what I'm saying? But either way, this show really becomes something a lot more powerful when I get to see what the people out there in the world think about what's happening in the world. So give me your thoughts. If you're on YouTube, go ahead, chat away. Or, you can jump on Messenger, or Skype might work. I don't know if YouTube, if you can video chat. I don't know if you can. That would be cool. Otherwise, just drop a comment in the chat and tell me what you think. So I'm talking to this old buddy of mine, right? And I'm talking about Africa, and he's talking about what, I don't remember. He basically segued into this other thing saying, basically he remarked that he knows we're on two ends of the political spectrum. And I'm looking at that suspiciously because I don't know what he thinks that means, or what he thinks I think that means. But I'm like, okay, whatever. So I let it go on, and he's talking about this and that. I'm asking him, well, hold on, what is left? Because he starts talking about the left says this or the left says that. And I'm like, what is exactly the left? And he's like, mainstream media. And I'm like, okay, well, what is mainstream media? What is it? And he's like, MSNBC, CNN. I'm like, okay, what are they though? What are they as entities? What are they? And he's like, well, they're corporations. I'm like, okay. And their modus operandi, their legal justification for life is to what? Generate profit, right? So he's telling me that the major corporations, these few major corporations, are somehow left wing. Like, what is left then? Well, how do you define left? He says that they're trying to push the Overton window. I'm like, how? If you don't know what the Overton window is, it's something to look up. That's really interesting. I'm gonna butcher it, so I would look it up if I were you. But basically, it's just sort of this notion that we look as a society at what is acceptable and not acceptable, and where does that fall on left versus right? And with all the PragerU nonsense and different stupid crap coming out from Turning Points to try it, or Moan Lave or whatever, trying to shift like what it means to be left and right, like that fascism would be left wing. You know what I mean? That's That's what one of these videos was saying, that the right wing, what you would say right wing, or Trump fans, or people who probably follow QAnon. I don't know what you want to call these people, those people, because I think there's a right wing out there that is like the Republican from the 80s, the Republican from maybe from the 90s, the guy that's like really sort of prude, that's a little bit like got something up his ass. So he would not deal with anything crass, and he would never say anything. He or she would never say anything crass, and was like at least pretended outwardly to be a godly. And I don't know, maybe that's just a fantasy, but like I think there's still some out there that are like, okay, we need to be fiscally responsible. We need to make sure the government's not overstepping its bounds. I agree with all that stuff, right? I think we need that. We need to make sure government is constantly watched with vigil. But I think that what we consider right wing, quote unquote right wing, has now morphed. And I think that a lot of these Republicans who probably wouldn't be jumping onto what is now the Republican Party and what would be considered the quote unquote right wing, I think that they're sort of forced to, because there's no other alternative. Like, who's the alternative? They don't, and it's not even so much that they love Trump or what the administration's doing or all that. They just hate the idea of being liberal. There's an idea, even though definitionally a lot of the what would be considered neoliberal, right, or what would be considered Reagan, Thatcher policies, those are considered liberal policies, right? This is a liberalization of the economy. So we broke out of mercantilism and moved into capitalism, right? So it's a liberalization of the market. So in America, the idea of liberal has its own connotation, right? And I'm saying this like I'm some international guy. I'm not. But if you read texts from long time, from the 1800s, if you read or if you read Marx, right? What's that? The 1800s, and they're going over these macro concepts, right, of what's going on. Read Adam Smith. He's talking about macro concepts. I mean, he gets into some issues like price of silver and stuff, which, if you want to dig into the relationship between whatever he's saying in that chapter, that's great. But really the biggest part of it is the rest of it, talking about how capital works, what are some of the pitfalls of capital that he goes through. And Adam Smith does this. His reference to the invisible hand, being in that text, talking about the notion that merchants or the capitalists will work together and work with the community and foster a situation where the community and everyone succeeds together, right, in their own long-term best interest. But he back then wasn't able to foresee the market the way it is now, in not necessarily volatility per se, but the volume of trade, the ability, maybe even the ability to settle these trades, to create financial instruments based off of several layers, of fiction, basically, off of corporations, off of commodities, off of all sorts of things. And these things start to have a short-term focus. And the idea that you need to meet quarterly earnings in order to, or something with such a short-term focus, really goes against a lot of the tenets of what Adam Smith was talking about in Wealth of Nations. Because as you start to, let's say, drop and extract pay the hardest that you can, and let's say the rest of your competition's doing similar, you are not helping your, the society as a whole. right? Or if you're, favoring labor in other lands that don't abide by the same rules as your land, then you're not, you're the invisible hand of your concern for your people in your nation, because you are from there and you have loyalty to that. Uh, that's the invisible hand that's supposed to keep you all in your best interest, helping to make the society great. But that's not what these Chicago boys that have basically been paid to wrench that message out of Wealth of Nations, because nobody's who's going to read it, right? When I went through and read it, I'm like, damn, I don't know how many people would go through this and actually read the whole thing. I thought it was interesting what he would, a lot of the observations he was making, because I could see what he was talking about. And I want to go back and read it again. I can't give you a whole lot of real specifics on it. It's not fresh on my mind, but it was just a revelation that I was seeing that he really, and really you have to look at it in conjunction with his other work. Well, he had a few, but there was another major work of his, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. And he really goes into the questions of morality. And if you look at Wealth of Nations in a vacuum, you probably miss some of the things that I think would give a little bit more fat on the meat of what's going on in Wealth of Nations, because we're not seeing that happening now. He also warns against the merchant class being involved in governance. And here we have lobbyists that constantly are involved in governance that are working for the merchant class. In fact, they've bought our government. So Adam Smith warned us of this, but the messages have been wrenched away, and you've been alienated from them, because most of us don't have the time we're too broke to be woke, right? We're too busy working, or we're too broke in the mind to even try to even challenge the way we've been thinking this whole time. Anyway, so I'm talking to him. I'm like, what is the mainstream media? It's a corporation. And I had to ask him, or do you mean to tell me that these corporations at the heads of Comcast or Viacom or whoever, and all these major media corporations, other than obviously Rupert Murdoch, but or GM and on all these major corporations, you're telling me that the heads of all those are like socialists or communists or something like that? That they're left wing? That's what you're telling me? And he's like, well, like those shareholders are all left wing. They're operating on a left wing basis. You're telling me that? Well, and we didn't get into it. I'll be fair to him, we didn't get into it, but he didn't really have much to say about that, because it's not true. It's a concocted myth. Like, they'll show some idiot doing some idiot thing and say that some, the left or liberals are, whoever these people are, right? The left or liberals are this or that. If someone were to go around and just simply say that Trump is, all Trump people are automatically racist and they should be shunned just for having a Trump bumper sticker, is that the right thing? Would that be the right thing to say or do or like believe? Right? We know that sounds silly, right? It sounds silly to them to be put in that perspective, to say that you're automatically racist. You should be treated like one and shunned like one. And so to automatically say that someone who's left, and what even is that? Most of the folks, I believe, most of the folks I talk to, don't really understand a definition of what left is. When they talk about the Overton window, they're talking about stuff like, I don't know, like social justice warriors and that kind of crap. And the reality for our cultural and political reality, we are moving dangerously right wing, dangerous with the technocratic institution of various forms of censorship, with the various forms of monitoring, with the various forms of response to speech to movement to just different everything, your person. The Fourth Amendment's practically suspended. um, it's just a different kind of time. And I think that if anything, the Overton windows just really shifted right, and that the majority of the population is so confused. I told him that at the end of the conversation, I was like, I'm going to say something that you might not like, but I just want to let you know. And he's like, curious about it. I said, if you want. He said, okay. And I said, look, you are really good at being like right wing, or really good at being this thing within the scope of a broader thing. And there's people that are good at being left wing, I guess, and saying the talking points of the left wing. But I said, but what you're caught up in makes it impossible for you to look at the bigger picture between all of what's happening. You know what I mean? That there's a bigger, broader scope to what's happening, and that there's a big concoction of this that's going on right now. And I think I think that's the biggest thing that's most frustrating for me, is that it's so hard to really convey to people that I don't really identify with the politics of it. I think it's disgusting. I think that people think it's a game, that they win some, they lose some, they whatever, that they're just vying for power, that it's us versus them. Meanwhile, the nation's falling apart, going to shit. I mean, it's compared to other nations who've actually invested in themselves and had some kind of national pride. We've just sort of pissed it away in the name of the dollar, in the name of privatization. And of course there's going to be people trying to blame the government, but you have elements in the government that are purposely trying to destroy the government, right? Because they seek to gain by destroying the government and by putting it into privatized hands, so that everything becomes a for-profit extraction method versus actually just getting something done, right? They're, by definition, if it's a for-profit institution, there's a layer. That profit layer is a layer of inefficiency. Either you need to be paying the people more, or you need to be charging the government less, right? Or the government should just do it itself. They can figure this stuff out. We have people that can figure these things out. I mean, the capitalists hire them all the time to make the capitalists run better, right? So we can still do the same kind of thing by the people. But again, we have elements within the government who would benefit to destroy the government. And so how can you have a functioning government? And then how do you get rid of those people? How do you know that you don't have the wolf with the sheep's clothing on in there destroying things? Like Obama, for instance, right? There's like not the same fanaticism, but damn near close to the same amount of fanaticism for Obama as there is for Trump. That no matter what he did, that he's great. I mean, he could drone bomb kids and all sorts of stuff. I mean, and authorize all this action, and civilians can die, and he can still get the Nobel Peace Prize, and people are going to go hoorah, right? He can sign the NDAA for 2012 that suspends posse comitatus, which means that the military can snatch you away. So let's pretend, let's say you're a reporter and you're trying to track down Pentagon money, and they find out that you're sniffing around in the wrong places. Okay, well, the military thinks you're a threat. Boom, you're gone. If nobody knows your name, you're just some person trying to get the scoop to the American people, and now you're gone, right? And you could be at Guantanamo Bay, and it's totally fine. Hey, signed in by Obama, great, right? And we don't have the critique. But the funny thing is, it wasn't in the left-wing media. It wasn't in the right-wing media either. Where was the Oath Keepers talking about that? You know what I mean? It's the betrayal of the people by so many people, whether or not they're doing it on purpose. So we do have a couple comments. Dustin jumps in. Dustin, thank you so much for tuning in. Dustin, longtime viewer of the show, and a longtime commenter and etc. participant. So let's see what he has to say. Trump recently proposed moving away from quarterly reporting. Hashtag MAGA. All right, CNN and MSNBC are most definitely left wing. I will say that it's patently obvious. But what does that mean, though? Left wing. What does that mean? In what way is it left wing? And what is your definition of left wing? Because I think that that's another thing that's going on here, is that we have a definitional problem in our country as far as sort of our perspective on what is what. It's like if you critique a right-wing person, then you must be left-wing, is basically what it is. Which that's just bull. Like, what if you critique left and you critique right? Then what are you, right? And I'm saying, like, with MSNBC, CNN, those things, left wing, what, in the cultural sense of the word? Like what? Because they show more gays? Like, I don't understand, because they piss on Bernie constantly. They piss on that Ortiz, Ocasio-Cortez, whatever, I can't remember her whole name, Alexandria, AOC. They constantly do that. So to say that they're left wing, I mean, you got Cuomo with a stupid, sketchboard trying to bunk up on Bernie and looking like a fool. And so to tell me they're left wing, I mean, it's just really, I don't know. I mean, then again, that's your view of the world, because again, the American culture, and this is what I'm talking about, has such a warped view of what is right, what is left, and what that means. Like, for instance, I think there's plenty of extraneous rules and regulations that the government has that we should find a way to clean up, because I'm sure there's some pork barrel spending. There's some other things that have been written into law that shouldn't even really be law, but they are law, and we need to find a way to get rid of that. But at the same time, we do also need some regulations that keep us safe. There was a joke that was going around, a meme that was saying something like Paul Ryan and Ayn Rand, or Anne Rand, depending on what period of time you're talking about her, and Ron Paul walk into a bar, and they all get served tainted alcohol because they don't have regulations, and they die. And so, we don't know if they die immediately. Maybe they die 10 years later because of what they've ingested at this place. But people were saying, like, well, regulations aren't needed to prevent that, because your reputation would be bad and people wouldn't come back. So you're going to take the gamble that, we're going to just hope that these new outfits that are popping up, if you give them a chance, you don't want to be the first one. And let's say, what if you don't die for a couple years from what you've ingested? Well, how are you going to trace that back, right? But then again, their solution is, well, eventually it'll catch up to them, right? And in the 2 years, all these people that have been drinking, and then they'll see there's effects in 2 years. It's just ludicrous. It's an idea that's just, it's pedantic, childish. It hasn't really been thought out to say that, you don't need some level of regulation. My question to those people was, why did the regulation exist? Did it exist before or after something happened? Because a vast majority of regulations happen because someone did some stupid shit. And it's like, hey, we're going to stop you from doing that. You need to adhere to at least these standards, right? because that way the American people can let their guard down, which to a large degree is fair because we don't have access to real information. Because if it's from the company, those people are allowed to lie. And if they're not allowed to lie, they will lobby the FDA in order to be allowed to lie. Like for instance, there's a USDA just approved and made an allowance that says that you can ship U.S. chicken to China for processing. So ship it 7,000 miles to China for processing. They do whatever they do with it and then ship it all the way back to the U.S. And no country of origin is required for this, right? And I don't know what they're doing to do. I mean, basically the idea is that the Chinese get paid $1 an hour to do this work that I guess supposedly the average poultry people in America are getting paid $11 an hour, right? So in order to extract the maximum profit, right? And they'll say, well, to save you money. Well, they're not. What leads you to believe that they're not going to charge you the maximum that the market will charge? They could be using slave labor in China. They're still going to charge you what the market allows to charge, what you're willing to pay. They're not going to chop the price down to super duper cheap just to save you money. They're not going to do that, right? Not unless everyone else starts doing it. All these people are racing to the bottom, right? Which is what we end up getting, right? And that's what destroyed our labor market. That's where we are, why we are the way we are. We've had people who have gone against Adam Smith's advice and has stopped looking at the long-term survivability of the population of the economy and have only looked at their own drive for profit. And that's, I think, the main focus. I think if there is going to be a major change, is there's going to have to be a major change to our understanding of financial instruments and how they're structured. Because if it's legal to be structured in the fantasy that is created now, then we can create a different fiction that works in a different way and create a different legal framework that works better than what's happening now, because the capitalists can't be trusted, right? We've seen that. We know that. I mean, Marx and Smith, I can't remember if Hayek, I got to go back and look through Hayek, warn against this, right? But all that's been forgotten by the Chicago school and the push from quote unquote the right wing, because it serves their purposes. It's just like when the white slave owners got the poor non-slave owning white poor class to pick up arms and fight for their right to own slaves. It's the same kind of deal. They have people who will fight to kill their own union. They have tricked people into fighting against the benefits that would help their own families. They've been tricked into fighting against people who would fight for them to have health care, right? They fight against their best interest because they've been fed something, just like the slave owners fed them ideas of this inferior race, doing it to your daughters, your pure, pristine white daughters and wives are going to get molested by the blacks if you free them, and whatever propaganda necessary. And they bought it, and they were able to buy it, and we fought a whole freaking war over it. We have the same situation going on now with pretty much the entire supply side economic theory. It's a religion, and people refuse to even look at critiques of their religion to see that, hey, you should be aware that some things cause problems. Like we just have some awareness now with the Catholic Church, right? Hey, it's great that you're letting your kids spend so much time with the bishops and stuff. Hey, but you should also be aware that there's something also going on potentially. You should be aware of this thing. We didn't really think about this before, and maybe it wasn't an issue before, but now it's an issue. It's come to light, or maybe we knew and we were trying to hide it from you, but hey, we're caught. I don't know what the Catholic Church is going to deal with that. I don't know that. You guys figure that out, and you say it in your comments. But It's the same kind of thing with capitalists. We're seeing it now. We saw it in the early 1900s. We've seen it in our country before. We've seen people get shot for the capitalists. We've seen people get selling their children because the capitalists destroyed the markets. We've seen and they've locked away the means of production. So we have factories that are empty, people that are starving, and we just simply don't have the profit motive, right? And so now I'm talking like a communist. So I'm not really saying that we should totally move to that, but there's a fundamental flaw with the system if that's possible, right? Because like right now, someone could short sell the dollar, someone could sell off a bunch of treasuries, and right now, and like our economy is so frail with all these bubbles right now, with the housing bubble, with consumer debt bubble, with the we are on the verge of another housing bubble, right? With student loan bubble, automotive bubble. I mean, I don't even know what I've already listed, but all of these things, they're going to come, right? We have an inflation issue. We have stagnant wages issue, right? With the majority of people in this country got some meager little bit of money from this like a nominal little tax break, which will in 10 years cause a higher tax percentage for middle class people if it's still alive, right? These things, like, it's just a big dupe, and people will follow it because it's not. I don't know why. It's mainly, I think it's because, and I'm sure that someone can put maybe Dustin's it looks like he's putting down some commentary, but it's in the same vein of working against your own best interests, right? Because we've seen the prophecies that have been put forth by people that have thought about these things a long time ago, and it's just playing out the normal contradictions that we've already seen. Automation is going to make for less and less need for workers, right? Are we growing in population or not? If we're growing in population, that becomes a real big problem. If we're automating and growing in population, what's going to happen with the workers, right? We're going to have to figure out a new way, right? And that's what the capitalists, and I'm sure Dustin hasn't considered, right? Because every time I argue with him, he always negates to remember the concept of time, and the capitalists have time, especially as as inflation rises, right? And so as your rent is due, as you have to buy milk and all of these things, they can hold out until you succumb and say, okay, I'll take that job. I'll just take that job because I need a job, right? And that becomes a bigger and bigger issue. And we have a whole generation that was presented with this problem decades ago, and they chose to ignore it. And we still have people today who continue to choose to ignore these very glaring, obvious contradictions in capitalism. But also, you've all felt it probably if you've ever worked a sales job. Your need to continually expand sales, expand, right? And if you extrapolate that out to a larger societal implication, we are looking at how do you get continual infinite growth on a finite planet, unless we're saying that the planet is not finite, which that's pretty silly, right? It's a willful ignorance that I think happens. That people are just going along with. But let's see what Dustin says. Looks like he's been pretty active while I've been yammering on. So thank you, Dustin, for being so active. He says, I believe the culturally recognized left-wing prototype involves people that use virtue signaling as a pretense to comprehensively control the wealth and actions of other people. I can sense one from a mile away. Fighting for slavery equals fighting for free choice in healthcare. It's akin, same effect. It's the same mental effect. I'm not saying that they're the same exact, what do we call it? Same exact extremes, or I don't know, levels of extreme or what. That's not the point. The point is that you can get duped just like they got duped. I mean, how is something so horrendous like that, right? And you can get duped based on like prejudice and, basically playing on a sense uh, of inferiority, really. And it worked. They were able to do it. And so he says he can sense it from a mile away, but I just don't know. I don't know what that is. This virtue signaling. What is that? Is that stuff like burning your Nikes? Is that virtue signaling? Or saying, having a bumper or sticker that says "I stand for my country" or something like that? Is that virtue signaling? Is that what he's talking about? Virtue signaling on the left. Crossing the 61,000 mark signals the American middle class may have finally earned more than it did in 1999. You can't post a link. So anyway, so Dustin says everybody has to take a job. James Boyd, everyone has the chance to study a different field if they are not happy in their current job. Yes, they can, but we got to think about access. How much does it cost to do that? What credentialing is accepted by the capitalist entities? It's easy to come up with a simplified answer to just if you don't like it, just go get training. But if you happen to be living in a place where you're working 3 jobs because you don't have what you just said that you should be able to get. Let's say I don't have it. How am I going to have it? Right? Maybe let's say I did make some mistakes early on in life, or maybe I came back as a veteran and I don't have the skills that transferred that great, and maybe I came back with a little bit something going on, or maybe I'm just not socially adjusted to the way things work within that system. Maybe I'm more well adjusted to surviving out in the plains. Right. But yet I was birthed into the system. And unless I am so good at the system that I can escape the system for a meager little while without trying to pay taxes and whatever, I still have to pay taxes. So inevitably, I have to touch the system again. I can't get away from that system. There's no opt-out provision. So there has to be, you have to have a system that can support the people that are working within the system. Right. And to say that, well, the job market being the way that it is okay. If you don't like it, you can get a better job. I mean, they used to say that to the meat packers back when people used to become part of sausages. They used to say that when kids were down in the coal mines. Hey, you know what? Learn better in school and not die and get black lung. It's like a real childish view of the world. Like you've never been in a position where you're so desperate. Right? Like you've never been there, so you don't know what it's like. And so, and maybe you could get through that, but this, again, it's the time. Meanwhile, your kids have to eat, or meanwhile you have to eat, or meanwhile, it's still the time issue, right? So there has to be a better way, because the capitalists have been given their way and they've chosen to squander it. And it's just a simple fact. If you can't make a living off of the wages that are made from working in that field or position or whatever it is, then it really doesn't deserve to be an occupation. It really doesn't. And to say that, oh, well, that's just a starting point or whatever, then it still shouldn't exist. The starting point should be that you could still live, right? Unless you were going to pay for them to live. If you want to say, yeah, the starting point can be some low, piss poor value that the capitalists have manipulated with their ability to manipulate wage labor, right? You get stuff like the Janus decision. You have destruction of unions. Capital's able to coalesce together while labor's not, right? It's a very one-sided playing field, right? But all of this gets ignored. It all gets ignored in the name of the ideology, right? And so this is the problem I face with guys that continue to defend the system without recognizing the flaws in the system, right? So again, I have to constantly reiterate, because I'm sure there's going to be a straw man coming up. Um, and so maybe, okay, it looks like I'm about to read into an anecdotal piece of comment here, but what was I going to say? From Dustin, because when I went on my little rant there, and I'm sure it's going to be about his anecdotal path to success. I'm going to guess that's what it is, because I generally see this happen. And the thing is, what does that mean when someone thinks that their personal anecdote is something that can be extrapolated to the rest of society? Like, what does that think? What do you think they think of themselves? I don't know. I don't know, but let's see what he says. Let's see. I'm just trying to, I'm putting out a prophecy on what I think it is. I could be totally wrong. Let's read the comment. When I literally had no family in high school, I paid for and studied myself to test out of 2 years of college. It just takes the will to do it. Okay, well, good for him. Again, he's talking from a perspective that's very self-centered, right? Because he's not thinking about people that maybe don't have that mental capacity. He's a smart guy. Dustin's a smart guy. But I've worked with some other folks that I tried to help, and all the King's horses and men tried to help to learn the relatively simple concepts, and they couldn't do it, right? So does that mean that they should not survive? What if they can't match this anecdotal superstar Dustin, right? That's great for him. I'm really glad that he had that will and the tenacity. Some people don't have it. Maybe they get depressed easily. Maybe they don't have the will and the tenacity because they've had a different life experience. To say that your life experience and the way that you handled life experience should blanket respond to the whole of our society as a nation, what does that say about you? I mean, I'm not going to say it, but I mean, what does that say? I'm looking at things not from, I had a great job. I had lots of neat things and worked my way up, and that's great. Times are changing. Things are changing. Machinations of the world are changing. Inflation's still going up. Pay has stagnated for decades. So things that happen when you were doing things are a little different. And you're a special guy. You should get a trophy for what you did, because you did great. And I think you're getting the rewards from that now because you were able to succeed. There are other people that don't succeed, and they're trying and they're trying and trying, but they keep failing. Maybe they have bad direction. Maybe they have a poor mentor. Maybe they're confused. Maybe they're just mentally unstable. I don't know, but they're on this earth. They've been birthed into this system. They have no opt out. So if they go get a job at KFC and they're good at it and they like making people happy and they know Mr. Johnson's going to be there every Thursday and they just love working there, then who are you to say that they shouldn't be able to work in that job, right? And you can say, well, the market's there to say. Well, the market is tilted. The market's not a fair market. It's not a free market, right? Otherwise, labor could coalesce together, could congregate together the same way capital can, and can unionize. And, with all the right to work and all of these things, a sniff of any kind of unionization will drop you immediately, right? So you really can't work together with the only thing that you have, which is your unity with your fellow laborer, right? And there are people that are brainwashed the same way, right? Maybe you don't want to put them on the same extreme, but really what you're doing is affecting the whole of society. So maybe it is tantamount to fighting for slavery when it doesn't really help you, right? Maybe you could say it is tantamount to that, because you are, by promulgating that belief, you are affecting and voting for people who continue to scam the American public. You are doing massive damage to the whole of the nation. So I don't know. Maybe it is akin. I don't know. let's let's see what the public thinks about that. I know Dustin's been active. Some other folks weigh in and see what we got going on. There's some hellos. So hello, Karen. Thanks for dropping a little comment there. Oh, some remarks about this Dustin fellow. Equity and equality. And yeah, give Dustin a trophy. So yeah, I mean, he does a good job. He did really well for his family. So let's see what else he says. Thank you, Dustin, by the way. I'm not trying to pick on you, though I am picking on you. That's part of the show. The truth hurts, and it's weakness leaving our mind. It includes me too. I hear all sorts of neat truths, and I am trying to become more and more resilient, just like working out a muscle. We have to talk about the truth to be able to, deal with it and handle more truth, right? So let's look at it. What he said. He literally did all these things. Labor can coalesce. That's called labor union. Come on, man. Keep your head in the game. But crap was not difficult. He says people just do not want to work. So that's his opinion. I don't know how much time he spent as an educator. I can tell you that in my brief period as a corporate educator, if you even want to call it that, I ran into literally thousands of people. And I can tell you that, Dustin, I'm just going to lay it out, Dustin. And I hope you stay a fan of the show, but really, it's guys like you who really can't think outside of your own mind, like that you have expectations that everybody can have the mental acuity, to have the attention span, to have whatever it is. It might have worked for you, and maybe you could, and maybe you need to start giving self-help seminars to the rest of the world to help them out, to show them how easy it is to be just like you. But let me ask you, Dustin, if you were to give all those secrets out to the world, and they could do it just the same exact as you, and you would guarantee their success by following those rules, and that they sat down and spent the same amount of time, that they would get guaranteed their money back, guaranteed they would get the same outcome as you. If we had that situation, how many people, I wonder how many people would succeed. I don't know. Would you give it out for free? Think about this too, Dustin. I mean, you tell me that everyone can go and do the superstar story, but let's not forget the efficient market theory. So as everybody is doing the superstar story, do you think your worth is going to be the same? Do you think their placement within the society is going to be the same if everybody does it? What if everybody did it? Right? So in a way, you're admitting that some people won't do it, and therefore they deserve their fate. Or, in your mind, it's just simply that they won't do it. You're negating and just simply saying that it was easy, so everyone can do it. You can also look at the narcissistic doctor who says the same thing, right? Really, it's the same thing we run into, these folks that really can't think outside their own mind, and really try to personify through and empathize through someone else. Or maybe they just haven't been exposed to it, because maybe through my exposure as someone who helped people try to understand things and seeing some of these mental barriers that some people have. And the fact that some people are going to be great at a thing, and they're good at this one thing, and whether or not it has a massively high value monetarily to society, they still deserve to be able to earn a living. So I would say that either the capitalist system has to learn to share more equitably. So instead of paying market rate, be forced through either, once you hit a certain size, like I'll just throw something out there. I think Germany's already experimented with it. If you're a corporation of a certain size, you have to now restructure or reorganize either into a cooperative, or I think as a corporation, you have to follow very specific and stringent guidelines for how your organization works, and labor is represented on the board, and things like that. So I think if we moved more in that direction, and yeah, that is that is putting more regulation on business, but it is for the good of the American people, because it would be a portion of the profits and not, oh no, I just lost all my comments. Oh, here we go. But let me see what else he says here. Working in success and even providing for your family is not easy. Right. It's not easy. Right. It's not meant to be easy. So who's determining and judging what is or isn't easy, and who is meant to or not meant to have a life that is easy or not easy? Life is pain, and society does not owe you anything. So, I mean, that's a sort of bleak outlook on the world. I mean, why couldn't you say life is beauty, life is love, all of these things? I mean, I think a lot of us believe that life is a lot more than pain. But I mean, that's neat that Dustin thinks that. Thank you, Dustin, for thinking life is pain. And society does not owe you anything. And I sort of, I disagree with that, because I didn't arrive in the society by choice. I didn't choose this system by choice. So in a way, society, not so much society, but the economy owes me a way to live within the economy. So again, if your wages are so low, I can't live within the economy, then you're failing. And that's why government regulations are just going to have to step in, because the capitalists have failed again. They do it all the time. But the thing is, if you look at it at a macro scale, it's fine to them, because they make money on the crash, they make money on the rise. It's you, the dupes, the dopes, the oddlotters, the idiots, including the financial advisors, by the way. So don't pat yourselves on the shoulders right now. You guys are all just the willing saps who float along and get tugged along, and you know that. I mean, we know that. Just the right trader makes the right move, and the crash could be tomorrow, right? So to think you have a true grasp of everything that's happening in the market is just, that's ridiculous. I don't even follow the market, and I can say with certainty that other people are fooling themselves if they say that they do. And I would say, yeah, that system owes me the ability to live, because I can't escape it. It either owes me an alternative, or it owes me an ability to live within the economy. So if it's failing on both of those fronts, then the system's failing, and either it has to be uprooted altogether, which if the capitalists don't get their shit straight, you might be looking at a socialist revolution on your hands. There are some people bubbling up, and it's not the social justice warrior Hillary people that I think Dustin thinks is the left. It's different people. It's not Antifa either. It's not Antifa. It is a movement that's getting more and more strength. But I think that there's also a big push for reform, so it doesn't have to be so extreme. If you put in some structural changes for distribution of profits, that employee and labor recompense is tied to production, not tied to market labor rate, which is artificial, then we've got something. And now some people might argue that now you're on the road to socialism, or on the road to communism, not so much communism, but socialism at least. And, you could argue that to some degree, yes, but you still own it. It's still private property. It's just that the structure of how profit is divided is different. And you can't simply use the most extractive potential method for extracting, for using labor. it's some of those things. And also trade practices to protect, for instance, the fact that, if our laborers are getting $11 an hour to process chicken, unless China is going to meet all of the same labor and food regulations and guidelines, they shouldn't be allowed to compete with us. If they're able to, at full actual, they can actually compete. I mean, who knows? Our standards are probably shit too, because all they got to do is grease the hands of the inspector. So I mean, really, at this point, the country is about as corrupted as what we imagined the USSR was at any given time. That's basically the world we're living in. But again, half of the country, or 33%, at least 35% of the country, and the other chunk really don't think about it much. I mean, they're really just thinking about their job, their family, getting food on the table, stuff like that. They don't have time to go back and think about what's really happening in the economy. What are the movements that are happening as far as between labor, between corporations, and I'm not talking mom and pop shops, right? Of course, if we take some of the French Revolution language from Marx, right, the petite bourgeoisie, the sociopathic petite bourgeoisie, the people like the small business owners and small renter class that think that they're in the capitalist class, but they're really not. They're really on the coattails of the capitalist class, right? But they think they are. And so a lot of times they'll have sort of these sociopathic ideas like, hey, if you can't survive on what you're living on now, well, study real hard and you'll be able to survive after you get some credentials or something like that, right? And it's like, okay, well, how about the time? How about when's that going to happen? How much money is that going to take, right? Now, he did it, and that's great, but not everyone's in a position where they can simply do that. And also, what line of work? Again, if we talk about efficient markets theory, it's if you believe the market is efficient, then you would have a hard time at any given point trying to make a decent living. It's like the whole STEM thing. All these engineers popping out of college with 60 grand in school debt, and they're making 27,000 a year first year as engineers because everyone told them to go for STEM. Well, guess what? We birthed out a whole bunch of science and technology engineers, and now they're working at call centers, right? So it's like the system is busted, and we have people willfully blind to that because of ideology. And that's the worst part. Like, how do you get your brothers and sisters in this nation to wake up, right? How do you get them to do that? And even the Hillary people, that go along with this notion that we'll never have socialized medicine. Again, that's just something where it doesn't make sense that we can have for-profit institutions holding people's lives hostage. If we have to, if that's that, I mean, that is portrayed as the only way to eradicate disease, but that's the only way to eradicate profitable disease. We could just employ scientists and different folks and have programs through the government and go through the same steps, for diseases that we could just simply attempt to eradicate, and not necessarily for the profit motive. But again, we have people that have been blinded by ideology, right? They're totally fine with the military having that benefit. They're totally fine with us dumping massive amounts of money into the military and the police and all these wings of the government that are authoritarian. They're fine with that. But then if we start talking about, hey, let's stop dumping money on all of this, all these weapon contractors that are extracting from us, all these capitalists that are sucking from the teat of the government. We need to curtail all that and actually look at programs that will employ Americans and that will provide us with programs and things that will help Americans. The era of neoliberalism is going to be coming to a close because it's going to collapse on itself. And either people are going to see it or it's just going to have to collapse on itself. More and more people are seeing it, but again, you have people that have been deceived, and they will fight it all the way to the hilt, blindly, just blindly espousing these different tropes and straw man arguments. So let's see what else does. I think he left some of the other comments. So let's see what's going on. So pain, life is pain. If you cannot add enough value even to provide for your basic needs, where does that economic productivity come from? You steal it from your neighbor. That is not freedom. That is slavery. Your neighbors didn't choose you either. So here again, a straw man, right? So nobody said to go steal it from your neighbor, but we have a system where you could be starved enough, because Dustin prefers it this way. If you don't make enough money to make ends meet, and you could be starving, because of the wage that you've been given by your capitalist overlord, because the jobs that you qualified for were limited, right? But you, according to him, can't add enough basic value, because according to him, the monetary value that you were able to get from working at that place equates to your value to society. So conversely, since I can make tons of money running a child porn hub, then that means my value to society, according to Dustin's society, is much higher. So that might be an option, right? I should look into that, because, well, the risk is high, so I'm going to get paid high. So therefore, my value must be high, right? So you see where this notion that your pay and your value really aren't connected. But we have a group of people that are willing to see their brothers and sisters starve and hold the ideology, instead of saying, yeah, this company is making X amount of profit. The reason why they're making profit is because of the labor, not because the CEO. They're not doing anything. They're not. What are they doing? Yeah, sure, they're running it, but what are they actually producing? Right? They've produced no value. So, but yet the hierarchical scheme of the extraction process is such that you can extract labor value, right? You take a commodity and then you create that value. What is that excess value? You turn a commodity into something that's worth more on the outside, right? On the output. Right. So they extract all that value and then give you what they feel that the market allows you to have. And that's what we ran into when the people were getting chopped into meat, when people were dying in the caves, and when people were getting used and getting paid script by the gold consortiums and whatnot. So, and plus, I mean, for him to say that people are allowed to coalesce through unions is just showing how little folks like, I don't know. I can't say folks like him, but I mean, I've heard the same arguments over and over again from folks very much like him, because they use the same arguments, because they're not really thought out. And here's the thing. I've been there. I grew up around this, right? I've said those same arguments until what? Until I thought it through a little bit deeper. And then I realized, whoa, that doesn't work. There's contradictions. You're rife with contradiction. And so to say, I'm not saying that a Politburo is the right answer to come up with decisions in the vast scheme of the choices of your ability to get different tennis shoes. But the government may have to intervene if the capitalist system is not providing wages, not allowing for unionization, not allowing for these things to happen the way that they did happen when we had our best economic period. We had strong unions. We had strong labor relations. A lot of that faded away with the neoliberal order at the end of the 70s or into the 80s, with Reagan, Thatcher, continued by Clinton, through NAFTA. It's just, it's a blindness. The left is going to praise Clinton without realizing how much he has imprisoned our nation through the prison pipeline, and what he did to derail labor through NAFTA, and those kinds of things, right? And it just continued on. Even Obama continued it. Hillary would have continued it. Donald Trump is continuing it, exacerbating it. The tariffs are all for the wrong reasons. It's just like, and he's just an inept guy. I mean, just listen to the guy talk. He's a buffoon. He doesn't understand anything, but yet we are able to find the charismatic leader who can lead people with a willful blindness that has not been seen in a very long time. You have to say, if you look back through history, you really haven't seen that level of willful blindness to such ineptitude, probably in our presidential history. But I don't know. I mean, at least for that's been recorded through recording devices. I mean, maybe one of the earlier presidents or the unknown presidents was more inept than Donald Trump. But they support him. And I think a lot of it just has to do with what they want to be the antithesis of, the manufactured idea of what left, quote unquote, left is. I mean, because a lot of the folks that believe in this stuff really do live very sheltered existences as far as where their information comes from and what they're willing to learn. And, it's like the highly religious people won't read science literature, or they won't read it with the intent to understand. I've seen it happen. I know not all people are like that, but I've just seen it happen. And it's the other way around. Atheists might read the Bible not with intent to understand, but just reading through it and maybe with intent to ridicule or something. And so their mind isn't really open to these things. And so, I've been guilty of it. And that's what led me to this path in the first place, because I had been guilty of it for so long. When I see a lot of what Dustin writes, and I've seen in the past guys write similar stuff, I've probably even used those words. I've heard those arguments. I grew up in under a right-wing father who had right-wing family and friends and all that stuff. And so I grew up with that and sort of carrying those torches. And it wasn't until I was really like wanting to understand what is happening without a bias, because I was starting to see that there were some things that were unraveling to me. And I had to really look at it with an open mind. Right. And now I can say, okay, yeah, there are some major faults with capitalism, but we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because we're not there as a society, as humans, as a being, as we're still fungus on the bread. So we either need to, as a fungus, figure out how do we keep ourselves from destroying the bread that we're on, or we're just going to destroy it and die. And maybe some of the spores, the rich spores, will get off into Mars and some other crap and destroy that later. So I always try to hold out faith that humanity will be smarter than fungus. But I always feel like I will be constantly disappointed. So I don't know. But Dustin has offered some more feedback or commentary. Thank you, Dustin, for being so active, by the way. Your neighbor didn't want you either. Engineers do very well. You understand that hostage situations involve controlling unwilling people working at a job that you literally drive yourself to in lieu of doing anything else at all with your time is not a hostage anything. Labor unions are allowed. I think you are confused on this topic. So I don't think he understands what right to work means. I don't think he understands what the ramifications of right to work mean. I don't think he's ever tried to unionize a non-union non-union workplace in a right to work state. So I think he's speaking out of turn. So sure, I'm confused on the topic. Please illuminate me. But I really think you don't know what you're talking about, because I'm pretty sure you're already anti-union, Dustin. Pete, let's be honest. So you really don't know much about them. You just think they're bad. And because you know very little about them and you haven't bothered to research it, you have this idea that the big bad union still exists when really like 8% of the non-governmental workforce is unionized, like 8%. So tell me, Dustin, how powerful are the unions if 8% of the jobs are unionized? So yeah, again, we're talking about situations where we're not getting a lot of depth of thought, right, in some of the arguments, and that's where I think a lot of the conversation sort of hit a impasse, because it's like, well, come on, if you don't know that this is happening, how can you weigh in on whether it's good or bad? So okay, Dustin's jumping back. I know exactly what right to work means. It means you can either join the union that represents your workforce or not. Similarly, your employer can hire a union workforce or not. Right. And so what is the real ramification of that? Right? If your job says they don't hire a union, then you can't be part of a union. Simple as that, right? So that's the point, is that they don't have rights to coalesce the way that he says that they do. So you have to create a wildcat strike or something like that, which could automatically make you get fired, right? And they could bring in a scab super easy. I mean, you're not even unionized, so it's not even a scab, just call it a replacement. Plus the alienation that both Adam Smith and Karl Marx described from capitalism makes it so you may or may not be able to find a job in the same field, possibly. And who knows, the average wait time, according to the local news here in Jacksonville, to find a new job is 4 months. So 4 months, Dustin, how are you surviving for 4 months, Dustin, while you try to find this other job? You are coerced into working. There's no other alternative. So it is a forced situation. If I decide not to work, what happens, Dustin? What happens, Dustin? So I have to work somewhere, don't I? So if that place that I'm working is offering below survival wage, then that means I'm not surviving, right? So that job shouldn't be able to provide below survival wages and still exist as a employment situation, because because of automation, because of all of these contradictions that Marx has already told us about 100 years ago, right? They will force the hand of the labor class, because they don't have the time. They don't have the 4 months to paying the mortgage. They don't have the freedom of movement, right? They can't just take off time. Not everyone can just simply take off time and go get an interview, right? And we're in a job market where there's certain jobs that you have hundreds of applicants applying for that singular job, right? And so what happens from the capitalist side? Well, we've got 100 applicants. Why don't we keep dropping the wage on it until we lower the applicant pool, right? And because since we've alienated and specialized the work so much, we can make it so this person can do this one thing, and then we'll just extract whatever value we can from them. And whether that skill is useful to them into the future or not, who cares? And then we'll treat them like shit. And then if they leave, they have the ability to do this one thing that might be proprietary, that's possibly useless to the rest of society, right? So there's a lot more layers of complexity here that are not being taken into consideration, right? So that's what we're talking about, right? So we really have to think about these things instead of just sort of forgetting that they are actually things to consider while we're living on this earth in this system that has been decided for us, right? So Karen is jumping on and she says, "Sing it, brother. The system is failing." Hold on, there's a cord or something in the way. "Let me know if you discover any good off-grid communes I'm in." And that might be something that might be an interesting thing to look at. I've got some ideas for off-grid type communities to where you can basically opt out or do capitalism light, to where your entire existence doesn't rely on having to appease one of these people like Dustin, who believe that your worth is determined by their wage that they offer you. But though he thinks he's a capitalist, he's really petit bourgeois. Karen says, great show, Boyd. Thank you so much. I hope to stumble upon another. Please catch it on the archives as well. And I do try to show around 10 o'clock on Wednesdays and Sundays. I'll probably be more consistent in the future. The other thing is, so there's going to be some changes coming up. Things are topsy-turvy right now, so I missed a whole week recently. I might miss another day or two here and there, maybe not. I don't know. There's going to be a lot of changes to the studio location, a lot of other changes happening soon. So be on the lookout. I think the quality and the depth is going to increase, especially in the next couple months. So be on the lookout for that. So for those of you that did join today, I want to thank you. But I do want to go and look at some more of these comments here. Great show. Okay. That would make an entertaining YouTube channel. Maybe the commune. Is that what he's talking about? Making a commune channel. Hey, maybe. I've got some ideas, man. I got some crazy ideas. I think I got systems that we can put in place that can create vegetables and fish and maybe some prawn or shrimp through aquaponics that can basically be like a food bank, and with very minimal input from either the government or the community, or by selling rental spaces or like charging rental space for restaurateurs who will cook this aquaponics and fare. I think there's a way to pull the pressure off of capitalism, because capitalism has shown it cannot manage the needs of the people and still hold the profit margin, or excuse me, the profit motive, without manipulation of the government and disregard for the planet and the people. It's just simply not working. They've shown they don't care, and they've shown that they have no intent to care. And so it's just, they screwed it up. And so if there's a socialist revolution, don't be surprised. It's probably going to happen. I wonder how that would work. I have an idea, though, in my mind, and I don't dare say it, but I know how to spot the real revolution versus a made-up revolution. I'll tell you this. Made-up revolution is going to kill a bunch of innocent civilians. I'll just give you these hints. The made-up revolution is going to kill innocent civilians. So the government, or a group working for the government, or someone who wants to stoke some type of division in our country, someone like that might do a terrorist might do an act against the civilian population. That's not real revolution. So if someone tries to, if the mainstream media, if Fox, if MSNBC, I don't care who it is, if they try to spin it, if RT tries to spin it like as if that slaughter of civilians is the impetus of revolution, then that's a government scam or some other type of scam to instigate. I can't tell you the hallmarks of the real revolution yet, because I think I might get in trouble for telling you what would amount to actual revolution and would force action. And it doesn't take much, but somebody's going to have to probably get hurt or something drastic. It won't be like legislative. But we'll see. We'll see. But I think the population is so just over the top. Like, they're in it. It's like you would never believe that someone would tell a bunch of other people that a spirit they believe in, a holy being that they believe in, will protect them from the venom of poisonous snakes. Right? No one would believe that. Right? Would they believe that? Yet there are congregations full of people who believe that. Um, so there are still congregations full of people that believe in trickle down economics, that believe in supply side economics, that believe in laissez faire after the continual failures of those motives, modes of operations. And it literally is an ideology akin to snake handling. I mean, it doesn't matter what evidence, it doesn't matter the reality. They're going to hold on to it regardless, and they're not going to admit that there's a big chance that they could get bit by the venom. Until it happens that one day, and then they'll say that they might have been. They'll come up with a reason why they got bit. They sinned last week, or I don't know, God wants to teach them a lesson and I didn't pray hard enough. Or there's always some made up doctrine that they can use to fork tongue their way into saying that that's the right way. And the reason I know is because I've been that person. Because at the end of the day, you have to either feign or be, right? And I got tired of pretending, right? You either have to feign as if you're ignorant, you have to be ignorant. I mean, really, that's only other options. Either you're ignorant or you're feigning ignorance and being disingenuous about things. And I was literally ignorant in some cases, and in some cases, I had to feign ignorance in order to justify the neoliberal doctrine. And I got tired of living like that and tired of being like that and coming up with the straw men, because that's the continual argument you see from the Ben Shapiros, from the David Rubins, from the Steven Crowders of the world, the Tucker Carlsons, all those guys, is the straw man that they've invented so they can knock down. We see it over and over. They won't talk about the truth. And there's left-wing people that aren't even going to look at what it is that we're even talking about. And they've been alienated to the point where they don't really have an opinion on it, and so they can't fight for it. And again, the definition of left is even askew, because some people would say Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and Bill Clinton would be left-wing. And I argue that they are of the neoliberal order. So they put a gay pride sticker on the neoliberal train wreck that's blasting through the world, really, not just our country, the whole world. But it's like Christianity. I mean, it's infected the whole world, and people have succumbed to it. And we also live in the same world where I'm an asshole if I feel sorry for them for succumbing to what I believe is mental virus, akin to mental virus. Because it gets contaminated. It's a contagion that goes, and if you're inoculated with it, it's hard to bring it out. And a lot of people get inoculated before they're even aware, when they're children, so they have no choice. But if I said I was sorry for them for their mental state, then I'm the asshole if I were to tell them to their face. But if they tell me they're sorry for me, and they will pray that I go to heaven, and they feel sorry of where I may end up going, and they tell me this to my face, that's just normal. And I should just not be rude to them and tell them that I feel sorry for them, right? Not that I say I'm sorry to the missionaries, but we live in that time where if I were to say that, and I've been chastised by putting out the hypothetical for saying, what if I said that? Then you'd be a rude asshole. Like, well, hold on. Are you not a rude asshole for saying that who I am and what I am, that because I don't believe in your fairy tale stuff, because you don't believe in Zeus, you don't believe in Allah, you don't believe in Vishnu. I just add one more, which is yours, and then people get all butthurt about it. That they can disavow anything they want. But anyway, that kind of stuff seeps into our politics too. And so just like that religious veracity that tenacity, zealotry almost, That is the Chicago school, and it's infected the minds of the American people. And we see those that it's infected that have carried out its whims rewarded. And so I think as a society, a lot of us look to these riches and these rewards as future goals and people though to emulate, right? But how about the guy that's volunteering at the school who doesn't make all that money, who doesn't do all of those things, but is helping a bunch of kids? If you emulate him, you'll be poor like him, right? So where would your standing be in society, right? So I mean, capitalism affects society in that way, and it creates anxiety in that way for our society. So I mean, you could have. I saw this clip, and I'm going to close the show off here in a minute. I know Dustin left some more comments. I want to read his comments here. Saw these kids, man. They were playing drums. Awesome kids. I think they were in Africa, and they were playing these drums that are made out of like Tupperware and like some plates and shit. Amazing, sounded amazing. And I was like, man, imagine if he had real shit, if he had access to real shit. But that's only available to certain people, certain way, and the actual structures of their society have been tainted by the actions of our government. And whether you agree with it or not, it's happened, and they now live with the effects of our imperialistic manners. So whatever, that's just the way things are. And that's how we get our cheap iPhones, which aren't even cheap, right? They extract and rape the land as much as they can for all the goods necessary, practically use slave labor and child labor to produce it. And then they don't necessarily, again, do you think they're passing the savings on to you, or are they just they're charging the most that the market can afford, right? And what does the market mean? Supply and demand. What drives demand? Does the supply necessarily drive demand? No, right? Does demand drive supply? Well, it can, right? So marketing, a lot of things, different things can drive demand, right? And so the fact that they use child labor has nothing to do with what the price of the phone is. It has to do with the profit that's generated. But they, believe me, are charging you the most that they can. They've already figured out what the happy medium is to get the most money at the right price point. And that's what their aim is. It's not like, well, we didn't really make that much. We didn't spend that much money on labor, so let's pass the savings on. Yeah, no, I mean, maybe if you think they're doing that. Okay. Let's see what he says. So he says, the real ramification, your union can only derive its natural power, not some contrived power under force of government. Not sure what he's talking about there. I'm just talking about being able to coalesce again, to be able to unionize labor. I don't know about power under force of government. I mean, the capitalists have had, workers shot for striking by the government, called the National Guard on labor, and had them killed before. The Reagan had a strike busted up by the government. So, I mean, is that not some contrived power under force of government to break up their ability to strike? You know what I mean? So, I mean, I don't want the government involved either. So the government, I mean, to some degree, they should be. I mean, if there's abuse from the labor union is abusing its power in whatever way that seems like it is not good for the American people or the laborers, and or the corporation itself. But if they're doing those things, sure. If they're doing something deemed illegal or fraudulent, then sure, the government should step in, and the government shouldn't. I don't know what he's talking about as far as government intervention on the labor side, unless he's talking specifically about Janus, which is really just a pussy piece of shit move by this Janus guy. And another way to again destroy unions. So folks like Dustin talk out of one side of their mouth and out of the other, right? And they say contradictory things that don't work in reality. And that's where it's hard to have these conversations, right? Either you haven't thought through your own contradictions, like I'm sitting here having to point them out, right? So what does that tell me about his own stance? Has he really thought it through? Those are questions that you'd really have to ask yourself. So let's see what he says. That believe in free people deciding the fate of their own lives and leaving other people alone. Okay, sure, I agree with that. I agree. You claim our current system that does, in asterisk there, allow unions is not sufficient because the union is not powerful enough. They have the full force of the power of their collective bargaining power. I said something contradictory. What is that? So again, he's the effect of right to work and the effect of these employers not hiring or allowing their employees to choose to unionize is taking that ability away. Okay, so if they say, well, we want to only hire non-union workers, okay, well, there you go. So it already is a catch-22, isn't it? Now, maybe Dustin thinks he's a clever little troll or what, but in reality, if that's the case, then that means your corporation is filled with scabs, or not scabs, but non-union workers, right? By default, they can't have union workers. As soon as they try to unionize, you get fired, right? And so they choose a non-union person to replace you. And so in that effect, they have no union ability. They have to do a wildcat strike, right? So, I mean, that I don't see how he doesn't see that this is a contradiction, right? And for him to say that believe in free people deciding the fate of their own lives and leaving other people alone. Yeah. I mean, people want to live their own lives and pursue happiness, and they're helping some other organization do that by supplying their labor, right? And that labor market can be manipulated, right? I've seen it firsthand. I've seen when Fidelity Investments moved in to Jacksonville, and now you have this sudden hiring of a massive job pool that's needed, and a employee vacuum. And the wage that was offered was more competitive, right? So what happened? Do you think that the wage was able to just stay there? So now the Merrill would have to fight to bring their wage up? Oh, no. No, they had a gentleman's agreement. We'll leave each other alone for the interest of both corporations. We can't have the labor market dictating what they get paid. Now, can we? Now, let's just work something out to where we don't hurt each other too much. Right? So they can collude. It's easy for them. That's two entities sitting in a boardroom. How easy is it for people to collude? Right? And then if you get a sniff of collusion from your employer, you get fired. What kind of risk is that? Right? And if it takes you 4 months to get a new job, then that's a pretty sufficient risk. Right? So again, very ill thought commentary. And it's just like, if I have to point these contradictions out, maybe, I mean, I don't know. I think of myself as this lay person, right? That I'm not seeing anything super crazy. Like, I know that he has to see this because he's a smart guy, right? So to me, it's just like, I don't understand where this disconnect is, right? Yeah, exactly. The labor market setting the wage. Again, the labor market being an artificial market, right? He always negates to remember these things. It's almost like it's like a waiter trying to hold too many glasses. It's like too much to think about at one time. And what I might need to do is on this side, like put up a whiteboard or something like that, so I can really break down these things. Because I think we have a tendency as people in our country, or maybe as people in general, but really bad in our country, to simplify things down to like a dichotomy, like a duality, and maybe a dialectic type thing. And so Yeah, so I don't know that he was there during this time when that was happening because it was in the very early stages of the hiring continuum. But sure, Fidelity bought the price down to meet the labor rate. They also completely ignored that agreement when they felt like it. Well, says who? How do you know? How do you know what they did exactly or not exactly? Right now, you might have been a supervisor for a little while, and you might have learned a little bit about some of the pay structure, but exactly what I'm talking about started happening, right? The fact that they could collude together to manipulate the rates, right? And again, looking at the market, that again, two major entities colluding to drive and manipulate the labor market. So it's just it's an unfair, tilted market, and labor can't collude that way. There wouldn't hire the labor that did collude, and so it's a catch-22 again. So what he's talking about with the labor unions, I mean, they've been neutered. I mean, if it's 8% or so of non-government workers are unionized, the other 92% aren't. So whatever fantasy story he's talking about with labor union strength, I don't know what he's talking about. So again, we get situations where we have to either make up stuff, or I don't even know. Like, it just has to be adversarial instead of understanding that there is a problem that we need to face and focus on. And that's the only way that we're going to dig our country out of a financial hole that we're doing. Let's see. Dustin says, you want to do that in your own voluntary community where you have to opt out. Have at it. I support that 100%. Yeah. See, Dustin, again, he still doesn't address the main issue with the opt out, because I would have to be good enough at capitalism in order to opt out of capitalism, right? So there's the irony. Another catch-22, right? So it's so anyway. So yeah, this would have to be something that you would have to be a project that I would have to put together because I was successful enough at capitalism to provide an opportunity or to create that other process. And I might have to do it. It might just have to be a person that does it, that steps up and does it. And maybe by doing that, it can, if it spreads far enough, it can then take out the knees of capitalism, and we can start moving towards a more socialistic economy. I don't really want to, but because of people like Dustin, I think capitalism is going to go towards its full collapse, and we will end up moving towards a socialistic enterprise. Otherwise, fascism is going to take over, and I think most people are going to fight the fascists. We'll see, but I think capitalism's really screwed up, and I think they're too dumb. They're not smart enough. They simply aren't. They elected Trump. They continue to be behind him. The only definition can be that they're really not smart. And so these folks, if they continue to grow and be in power, can become very dangerous for the country. And I think more and more people will start realizing that. And you can call them left, or you can call them whatever else you want. I propose we come up with a new nation, a new nation party or something, to where a new nation belief or whatever, to where we just look at what is making sense and what's not. What are pitfalls we have to worry about? What does government overreach look like? How do we get rid of it? What does corporate overreach look like? How do we get rid of it? These are just things that we should face with open-minded truth. And we have so many closed-minded people stuck to ideology that makes it impossible to see past what's happening, right? It's the fungus eating the edges of the bread, and you're trying to warn people, and they're like, whatever, it'll be fine. You don't know what you're talking about. Okay, so be it. But now, when we have to deal with the ramifications of your ill-founded method, we all pay for that, is the problem, right? So we don't have choice. that takes away liberty from other people. So all this talk about liberty, when you basically will destroy a nation that is centered around liberty, which will fall into fascism, basically. Either that or it'll fall into socialism, because the capitalists don't want to be open-minded enough to see the problems that they're going to have to address as we get closer to end stage, or we already in end stage, as we lapse further and further, deeper and deeper into the end stage. All right, Dustin goes on to say, but you try and force that government control crap on the nation involuntarily. It's civil war, baby, believe me. So yeah, no one's trying to say anything about government control. I'm saying that maybe the government, by way of taxing the capitalist system, maybe should set up these communes, so you can opt out without having to pay the capitalist price for land and all this other crap. It should be government, people, land that we could, whoever wants to go to, they can go on this thing, and they can, if it's a self-sustaining community, they can opt out and they can opt in, take a shuttle bus or take their own car, whatever mode of transportation, go to the city, work for a where, or maybe the capitalists will come from the city to this enclave, and we'll still participate in the capitalist or in the free market, right? But escape the clutches of capitalism, because survival doesn't require capitalist money, right? So food, shelter, those things are taken care of. Now, if you want more stuff, you want fancy stuff, you want the latest technology, you might have to go find some place or create your own business, or find your own way through the capitalist enterprise, or the economy. And by having this enclave, you could say, instead of opting out or opting to go to college to get an unknown degree, to get an unknown job that maybe pays you some menial salary after you get your degree, what if you wanted to go spend 3 years at the enclave, learn woodworking, and then pop out making chairs or some shit, right? What a neat alternative, right? And you don't have to scrounge and die every day to survive, working for $3 an hour, because that's what the labor market dictated, because that's how the capitalists worked the market down, right? And Dustin would be fine for that, because that's your worth to society. Whatever you're paid is your worth to society, as we know. Again, you go run the child porn server hub and get paid tons and tons of money from all the traffic, then then that must equate to your value to society, right? So since we're equating money to value in society. All right, so anyway, let's go ahead and wrap this thing up. A couple more, kind of revealing, right? It actually takes someone's time and energy and success to pay for the needs of others. Who knew? Yeah, again, it's the private property issue that someone can. It's not a even playing field. You're playing Monopoly when someone already owns the board, right? And to say that the solution for the masses, not for one or two little ping pong balls that pop up, but for the masses, is to go and create an enterprise and go try to find your way to fight onto the Monopoly board, is a sham of a joke of a fairy tale. And the people that espouse it have just really not thought of it. They don't think about efficient market theory. They don't think deeply enough about it. If everybody was doing what they think that they just said to do, go start your own business, right? They're not thinking about the barriers to entry. They're not thinking about the fact that not everyone can do that. Not everyone's suited for that. But they're all self-centered and they have no empathy, right? Because most of them are somewhat sociopathic on some level, right? Because it is a spectrum. And so you have to deal with, like, how you have to look at it, like, you have to use the same kind of words, the same kind of communication methods that you would to an abusive, like a narcissistic, sociopathic partner, right? Someone who will gaslight you to tell you that you're not, what you're worried about doesn't exist, or what they did wasn't real, or all of these kinds of things, right? It's all of the same kind of gestures, the same kind of straw man, the same kind of reductio ad absurdums, the same kind of silly talk, right, that you have to adjust for. Not everyone can do it. It's tough. I don't know how to do it, but I'm trying, struggling every day, a little by little, learning and learning. All right, so a couple more comments here. How's that not controlling people to fund your common? LOL. Well, it is. I mean, you want access to the labor, or excuse me, you want access as a capitalist to this chunk of society and consumers, then yeah, you pay the price and you can fund those things. You don't have to be part of that. You can go to the community living arrangement and stay there for as long as you want. Everybody could do it. You don't have to do it. And it's not the only option. If you want to go buy land, you could do that. But let's say you can't afford your mortgage because you lost your job. You could move into this and still get fed, still have a shelter, and not die on the street. That's what I'm saying, right? So that then in turn means that the rent maybe shouldn't be, maybe if that they could look at that as an alternative to rent as well and say, hey, look, all Americans have the right to have one of these if they want to, right? Not everyone's going to use theirs. Great. So someone else can use it, right? And then when they stop using it, someone else can move in and you can eat the food. And part of it would be almost like a hostel. You volunteer. Maybe there'll be some key volunteers as long as they have a place to live. Maybe some retired people, they get free food, a free place to live. They'll take pride in what they do. They'll grow the most food. They'll grow the most fish. They'll grow the best shrimp. And then everybody will say, hey, this is the best place to get trout. This is the best place to get perch. Hey, these guys cook it the best. Hey, the free market's still at work, Dustin. No one's been forced to do anything, Dustin. Right? I'm being forced to fund the F-35. I don't like that. You don't like the idea of funding by minuscule amounts, funding the idea of some of these community living arrangements. Maybe we could do half and half, local and federal, something like that. I don't know, but it would take a lot of pressure off of capitalism. It would take pressure off of the housing market and the food market, both things that are held hostage. Those are necessities for life. You're born into the system, right? We're not living in the Serengeti. I can't just go leave and go create my own tribe somewhere, right? I can't just go live on the land somewhere. If it's government land, I can't just go live there. If it's BLM land or something not designated, right? If it's a private land, I can't just go live there, right? So this fantasy of an opt-out provision being available now is just a fantasy, right? So there isn't. The only opt-out is basically homelessness or institutionalization, right? Anyway, says, never mind, I would vote to allow an endowment to fund this, but it's a one-way ticket only. And then he says, so you have to refer to the people from whom you wish to extract their wealth as abusers. Amazing. I don't really know how they are abusers, the people that you wish to extract their wealth from. I don't know what you mean. Oh, is he talking about the free market, being able to participate in the free market? Actually, they don't have to be abusers per se. If they drop the capitalist doctrines of profit at all costs and had a more equitable sharing arrangement, I think that these systems could work together and actually create an amazing world that we could never imagine. Like, imagine people that aren't desperately trying to make a living and not die and scratch out a living, being able to actually think. There could be an Einstein right now mopping floors because they have no access to anything else right now for whatever reason. Stephen Jay Gould talked about the farmers or the whoever out there, the Einsteins, all the great minds that are lost because they don't have access to the world, right? So it would completely change the way that our society would work, just this one little thing. And I think it could be something, I don't know, but I'm going to have to do it as an individual and prove the concept, and then maybe I could sell it to governments or something like that. A free internet. Yeah, I think internet should be I think internet should be a utility. You might still have to pay for it though, but or pay for it through taxes. I don't know. We need a more transparent system for our taxes. Though they're just squandering our money. I don't trust them. Free front hole hats, free protest signs. Someone's probably funding it, right? Soros. It's not free. It's Soros funded, right? Isn't that what the story is? All right, and you had some more on YouTube here. They would hire the labor that colluded via labor union if they had unique skills and therefore collective power they could use as leverage. No, they won't. No, they won't. If you're part of a union and they know it, they'll just drop you. And the thing is, your unique skills aren't unique because of the isolation and alienation and specialization that occurs in capitalist systems. This is evident in both Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations and Karl Marx's Capital. So that's simply not true necessarily. It can be in some cases, but not all cases. And it goes back to the power dynamic, the power imbalance between labor and capital, in the fact that the marketability of the skill after having invested time of your life and labor and energy into helping build this enterprise, the viability of that skill is questionable, especially as systems continue to specialize. And so that's why some folks that are working in different places, they might know how to do a thing. They know how to place a trade, but not all trades. They know how to do a specialized kind of transaction on the phone, but they can't do all transactions, things like that. So where, let's say you move on before you know all the transactions, or let's say you know it all for this one company, but then it's not transferable to other companies, right? But you have invested that time and effort and paid for your wage, and now you have nothing to show for it, no equity, no nothing. Now someone like Dustin would say, well, you have the opportunity to buy stock purchase plans, etc. But if you're already getting a non-survivor wage, then you can't really pack away money to do that. And then I would be against any fiduciary responsibility, a real fiduciary responsibility or prudent man rule, because of the risk involved. So again, either not really thought out, or just not knowledgeable enough. I don't know. I think you meant dangerous to the thieves. I don't know. How can people without capital pay for that? I don't know. What I learned woodworking, how to make furniture while working at Fidelity. Yeah, I mean, you can work and spend your spare time if you have a job that allows for good work-life balance. I mean, there's definitely folks out there. The number is getting smaller and smaller. A majority of our population is in a crisis situation, as in more than 50%. So that is, that's something to think about. So I'm glad he was able to learn woodworking. I learned a whole lot of stuff while I was working at, when I was working at Fidelity and for other things, for other corporations. I've learned a lot in my spare time. But again, I'm looking past myself. I'm looking at the landscape of the American people, my brothers and sisters in the nation. I'm not only concerned about my own standing. So again, the petit bourgeois, I hate to say this because it makes me sound like a Marxist, but you fit the role so perfectly. And so if you spend a little bit of time and just read a little bit, or you just read it, I might actually do a series where I read it with you and break down chapters. And I'm not an expert, but it just at least can give us a way to bounce out ideas and analyze both Wealth of Nations. I want to do Hayek's Road to Serfdom, Das Kapital with Marx. And the reason is not because they are 100% prophetic and everything, but these things have already been thought of. These big macro events have already been thought of and thought through. And we're seeing them happen, and we're being manipulated by a very sophisticated manipulation scheme that is all around us. We feel it, you taste it. It's the matrix. You can call it whatever you want, but it's there. And what do? I don't know. So thank you, Dustin, for being such an active participant. Thank you, Karen, for all of your awesome comments. Hopefully you'll catch the show again. And I'll be starting to edit them down so a little bit more digestible and a little bit more shareable. And remember, if you guys want to talk about anything in particular, let me know. I want to put some segments of different kinds of segments in the show. So let me know if there's something you want me specifically to comment on, either silly stuff in right-wing media or left-wing media or calling out propaganda. I'm just like looking for sort of a segment to highlight something. So put down some comments. If you want to talk about capitalism some more, if you want to talk about the female fulcrum theory and how women can change the world, put it in the comments. Let me know. But it's been an awesome episode. It actually lasted quite a bit longer than I thought it would. But that's all right. I think we had a good combo, a lot of participation. I want to thank Dustin again. Sorry if I was hard on you a little bit, but again, the truth hurts. I'm supposed to be as honest as possible on the show, and so are you. And so I don't mind if you just put a truth bomb out there. It is not going to hurt my feelings. And that's part of having this podcast. Not everyone can have one because it hurts you in the feels sometimes. And it's okay. That's why we do these things. Make sure that we don't have any last minute. So again, want to thank you. Like, share, subscribe. Spread this around. Get people involved. If there's somebody that has a strong opinion about something I talked about today, get them to check out the show and spread it around. It's not left. I mean, people are gonna say it's left wing just because the Overton window has moved so far to the right, but really, I'm just looking at how can we do the best for our nation at this point in time, given what we know about technology, about what has already been predicted, and what we're seeing happening. Anyway, and also the media. I want to talk about the media too. If you, Seprock Beats always makes it worth it. That's insane. Last thing, what was I gonna say? Oh yeah, I just blanked out. Anyway, if there's something you want to talk about, let me know and we'll talk about it. Peace out, y'all. Play a bomb best, then hoop it. Play a bomb best, then hoop it. Play a bomb, play a bomb best, play a bomb best, play a bomb best, then hoop it. Play a bomb best, then